Where are you right now? Where are you based?
I'm in Boulder, Colorado. Yeah. I was in Seattle and I moved here like 3, 4 months ago.
Yeah, it's amazing. I reckon Boulder, Colorado has the record for how many podcasts have come out of there because there just seems to be so much talent constantly there for altitude. Australians seem to go there a lot as well. I don't know if you've got any Aussie mates over there. I see a few of us on your Instagram are
Mm.
following you, like Jess Hull and I don't know if you know Lydia O'Donnell.
Yeah. I know Lydia. I worked with Femiko a little bit, did like a collaboration with them on YouTube, so I know her. And then I know like uh Ollie Hoare
Yeah.
and I mean he's not Australian but New Zealand Geordie Beamish.
Yeah.
So
Couple of
yeah.
legends. Yeah, Ollie. I actually don't know Ollie personally. I've followed him from a distance for a while. I feel like he's one of the Aussie distance runners I just haven't met for whatever reason. But funny story, in case he's listening, my 2-year-old was born in I should know this. What are we? October of 2022. And I know you guys pay no attention to it, but we have the Commonwealth Games,
Mm,
which is like a big championship race here, and it was the one where Ollie Hoare came back from nowhere to win. And I
mm.
wasn't a huge fan of the name Ollie until he won that race. My wife loved it, and so I thought, oh, you know what, we'll give the name Ollie to my second boy. So, despite the fact I've never met him, he's got more of an impact on the family than he realizes.
That's so funny. That's not where I expected that to go. I thought you were gonna be like, yeah, I saw him win a race, so now like I'm a fan. But you're like, I saw him win a race. I named my second born child after
it's
him.
all it takes in this household. I'm just so glad he
It's a
had a decent
reasonable
name.
reaction to a good race, honestly.
Yeah, awesome. That's so good. So, who are you? Who I think it was. I also spoke with Charlie Lawrence fairly recently. I don't know if he's in Boulder.
Oh yeah, he's in Boulder. We're actually pretty good friends. Yeah, we run together fairly often. We're going to his house for Thanksgiving.
Oh, dude, yeah, awesome. All right, so I'm starting to just sort of impose myself on your training group. It turns out,
Yeah, I mean, I guess you just want to be a part of it.
as much as I can from this far away. I'm so excited to get a chance to sit down with you. I was actually I was doing a little coaching call with a bloke from Canada just before we got on, and I said, mate, I've got to let you go because I'm about to do a podcast with Ali. And I'm sure I butchered your last name, but he got pumped. He was like, "Dude, I'm like the biggest fan of her YouTube channel." It's interesting the doors that like a YouTube channel opens up. Hey, I noticed that you've been on there for a few years, and you got some traction going.
Yeah, I love YouTube. It's definitely my favorite form of social media because I feel like the long form content makes it so much more about like personality and investment instead of just like superficial appearance and like just the clickbait sort of. I feel like Instagram is much more surface level and then YouTube goes a lot deeper. So I really like that about it. And because it's long form, you get like such a connection with your audience where like there are people that comment on my videos that have commented since like my first video almost 4 years ago and like are still commenting. So I literally feel like we're best friends and we've never met. And I'm like, I look forward to their comments and I'm like, yeah, no, YouTube is, I really love it. Yeah, and just slowly growing, I'm almost at 80,000 subscribers, so really excited. When you hit 100K, you get a YouTube play button, and so that's just what I'm dreaming of.
Man, I love the fact that you said you're slowly growing because I started my channel about 4 years ago as well, and I'm on 13,700. And I'm like, I've already got my eyes on that play button, but it's going to be either I've got to improve my content or just start taking a Jake Paul approach to what it is that I'm doing. But yeah, what was it about it that got you started on there? Because I've seen a few athletes make the move. Like I was excited a while ago because Morgan McDonald started tracking along with a couple of YouTube videos. I know he's got his podcast and stuff, but it is nice to get a little bit of a glimpse into sort of the mindset, the training, the racing, just the headspace of what being a professional runner looks like. But what was sort of the trigger for you to get it going?
Yeah, well, I'm actually dating Spencer Brown. I don't know if you've heard of him, the athlete special on YouTube. And he has like 100 and almost 20,000 subscribers. He started his channel his freshman year of college at Georgetown and then documented what it was like to be a student athlete and then signed on with the Brooks Beasts and was like documenting the life of a professional runner. And I met him when he initially joined the Beasts and we started dating. And I saw him like editing his videos and like doing that. And something a lot of people don't realize about professional running is one of the things is like it can be pretty boring because like you can only train so many hours a day and then it's just like you have a lot of free time. And I was like, well, that looks kind of fun. Maybe I'll just start a YouTube channel. So then I started my channel. He kind of taught me how to edit, how to make thumbnails and stuff. And yeah, then I just had a YouTube channel and been just grinding on there ever since. I've taken like a couple breaks. I think at one point I took like 6 months off, and at another point I took like 2 or 3 months off. But for the last year, almost 2 years, I've posted a video like every 5 to 6 days with only like a few exceptions.
That's impressive. I mean, I've spent enough time on Final Cut Pro to know how brutal the editing process can be. In fact, I've palmed that job off to someone else to do for me at the moment because mine, I don't know, like I think the style of videos that you do they're very personal, they're very insightful. I think sometimes it's nice to be able to just guide the structure of video with yourself. Mine are a little more, I don't know what you would call it, like information based in the sense of like I'm just usually talking to the camera. They're quite easy to cut from start to finish and edit. And a lot of the time I would look at my final product and how long it took me to do, and I go, that's so bad. Like that just looks so terrible. And I
Oh,
pay a
I
guy
get
25, pay a guy $30 and he sends it back and I go, I didn't know something like this was possible. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. But how did you start to decide which direction to take it? Because obviously there's so many different focus points that you could have when it comes to a channel like yours, from training and racing and diet and whatever else, the highs and the lows. Has it sort of been guided by what it is that people like, or are you like, no, you know what, this week I'm gonna take it in a particular direction?
I think obviously like when you're making a video for YouTube and like you said, it's a lot of time commitment. I think it's easy to forget when you're taking in a video like how every single little thing in it has to be put there like it is edited. So, videos will take me like a normal video will take me 6 to 8 hours and that's like
Yeah.
an 8-minute video. So, like, obviously, you want it to get traction. You want people to view it and appreciate it and, like, receive whatever messages or stories you're sharing in it. So, part of it is obviously going to be based around, like, okay, what do people want to see? But I think a bigger part of it for me is, like, what am I passionate about creating? Because it is so much time and effort that I'm like, I don't want to be doing this and it feel like a chore. I want to be excited about it and, like, excited to share this. So I think it's a balance between the two because I obviously don't want to like, yes, I would just make vlogs of just me petting Georgie because I'm passionate about that. Like Georgie's my dog, but like that's not really what people want to see. So like it's a balance, but it's definitely, I would say, more about like what I'm passionate to share and then also balanced with like what people want to see.
Yeah. What's the recent passion? Like what are you most excited about sharing at the moment?
Well, right now I'm kind of like I actually got really excited yesterday because I was like, it's the end of my season. I have like this little gap where it's kind of like I'm not necessarily like in a like an intense training phase. I don't like have any races super close. So I'm like I kind of have a time where like it's very ambiguous, like I can kind of share whatever. Whereas most of the year the storyline is based around like what I'm training for, what my races are and stuff like that. Which obviously I also throw in like other types of videos, but a lot of it's training and racing. And right now I'm like, I have all this freedom. So yesterday I was ideating about like what I want to share. I'm thinking about making like some like end of year type videos, like wrap up, recaps, but also like little adding a little spice in there. And like, so I was coming up with different ideas for that. I think I have like 3 different video ideas that I'm going to do. I'm not going to share them because I want it to be a surprise, but I'm really excited. I actually started like making thumbnails yesterday for videos that I have not yet like filmed, anything. Like I'm just making thumbnails for these videos that do not exist.
It's kind of mind blowing. Like I reckon for anyone out there who's got no idea of the concept of how YouTube operates, it is amazing how much traction a video can get based on a thumbnail alone. Hey, like sometimes I'm exactly the same. I've got a video idea and I'm like, oh, I'll just have a little bit of a toy around with how I can just capture someone's attention based on what this video is and how I'm going to draw them in. I heard I promise we're going to talk about running in a moment, but just while we're on it, I heard Mr. Beast uh, speaking about how him and his crew for like a year and a half every day would meet up just with 25 of the most trending YouTube videos at that moment and have a look to see if there were any similar themes between thumbnails. Like he talked about it like a real art, and it's funny when you do dip your toes right into the world of YouTube. It's amazing how many people start with the conversation around, all right, what does the thumbnail look like and what's a good title? It's a
Yeah.
completely different world.
It's like I love it and I hate it sometimes because it's so much pressure on the thumbnail. And it's frustrating too because like I don't really consider myself like an artistic person. So that side of it doesn't come super naturally to me. But it's also exciting because when you hit that thumbnail right, it's crazy what it can do.
So true. It's so true. You said at the moment like you've got no particular races or anything on the horizon that's really desperate to train for. So you're in a is it a little bit of an off season that you're in at the moment?
Yeah, I think I'll have like I just took a week off running and just like cross trained, and then this week I'm running again, but like low key sort of thing. And then it'll probably be like another week low key, and then kind of start to get back into it. So just like a few weeks basically of like turning my brain off and not thinking about running as much, which clearly is really made some space in my brain to start fixating on thumbnails. So
So is that something you'll do at the end of each season? Like do you always take a little bit of a break, a little bit of downtime?
I haven't really taken any time off since last October. So, like, my training is structured throughout the year where I kind of have little breaks after every single race. And that's like an injury prevention thing because, like, historically, most of my injuries have come after major races. And so, after every race this year, I'll take 2 days off running. And usually I cross train, so it's not like a full break, but 2 days off running every time. And then like after like cross country season ended, it would be like 3 or 4 days. After track season ended, it was like 3 or 4 days. And then after the trail season was over, that was kind of like the end of the season, so it was a full week.
Yeah. And what so that's as much mental as it is physical for you.
Yeah, like I don't feel burnt out, but like I was still enjoying racing and training and everything. Um, but I'm not like sad to not be focused on it right now. So I'm excited to like take a little bit of time, turn my brain off of running, and then when I get back to it, I'll be like super excited for it, and I'll be like sad to not be like fixating on running, which is like important because you really need like you need the flame to be burning bright at the beginning of the racing because oftentimes the racing season goes for like 9 months. So
It's really true. It's always interesting as well, especially I always found it hard when I was competing, especially during the middle of a season where you might have a race or two which didn't go the way that you wanted it to go. I always found it was mentally a little more challenging in those regards. Whereas when you're on fire, like it's easy to keep that flame burning bright, hey,
Mhm.
because it's every week's like another opportunity to get out there and hopefully just smack it out of the park. Whereas, yeah, the flip side of that is just when you've had a couple of bad races, that mental energy that you waste on like, oh my gosh, like is training going well? Is there something wrong with my body? Am I injured? Am I sick? It's kind of exhausting. So I always enjoyed that at the end of a season as well, like really similar. I would take a 2 week break at the end of like a track season, usually going into cross
Mhm.
country, just put the feet up and yeah, like you, mental, physical refresh and come back to it absolutely sort of pumped and ready to go. But
Yeah.
are you big on scheduling that ahead of time, like before you take your especially like your end of season little breaks? Is that something that you've got penciled in well in
Um,
advance, or are you sort of just going by how you feel?
Not really. I think it's more based on how I feel. Like it's not entirely like required or anything, but after my last race I started running again and I was like, you know what, like my body it just feels kind of worn down and I'm not like super excited to train every day. Like it wasn't to the point where I was like dreading it or anything, but I was like, I'm not like crazy excited for this, so maybe I should just like take take a little bit of time like to not train as seriously, like still, go and maybe cross train a little bit every day, but like just not be structured.
For sure. There's so much flexibility. There's so much space that comes with like an unstructured off season. Hey, that was another thing I really enjoyed. Just that feeling of being able to just wake up, and if you wanted to do something, you could, and if you wanted to watch Netflix, you could, because you just had no responsibility to be in any particular
Yeah.
place to meet up for a long run. Are you
No,
like how
definitely.
are you, yeah, how are you usually structuring your week? Like, does that vary much throughout the course of a year, or are you one of the athletes that you've got a pretty similar structure in terms of like, all right, Sunday's long run, Tuesday's session?
Yeah, it's pretty similar all throughout the year. I would say just like obviously the the workouts change depending on what my goals are. But generally it's like Monday easy and hill strides, Tuesday workout, Wednesday cross train, Thursday easy and strides, Friday workout, Saturday long run, Sunday off. Um, but then that also changes throughout the year. And like sometimes instead of doing a workout Friday, I'll do my long run and like kind of do like a long run workout type thing Friday. And then Saturday will be like a long cross train. So it depends. I'll run between 4 and 5 days a week usually. Um, and then, yeah, my workouts, sometimes I'll do like one workout in a long run. Sometimes I'll do two workouts in a long run. So it just depends. And I don't really have like a specific mileage target every week either. Um, like I just kind of do whatever the plan is, and then my mileage will be a bit all over the place because if you're like changing how many days a week you run, it just, obviously changes the mileage. So like anyone looking at my Strava graph is probably just like confused because it's like dee, 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 dee.
That's so interesting. Like, how did you get to a point where you made that decision? Because that is one thing that I'm sure we both know. There's a really big obsession around when it comes to running performance. People go, okay, I want to try and hold my mileage at around this for as long as I can and just see how it goes. And the idea of those dips is it's like a real head spin for so many of us OCD running junkies who just want to see high mileage all the time. Um, that's a unique approach that I haven't heard many athletes speak about before.
Yeah, well, I mean, other than when I taper for like big races and stuff, my volume generally stays about the same. So, like, when I'm having one less day of running that week, I'm like replacing it with 2 hours on the arc trainer. So, it's not like I'm not training. And I think, like, mentally, that for me is good because I'm like, I'm still training hard. I'm still putting in the same amount of hours or more. It's just in a different form of training. And also for me, like having that flexibility around mileage and like replacing mileage with cross training and considering them almost interchangeable has been like super good for me with avoiding injury because like if something ever hurts, I'll just cross train for a couple days before it gets bad, and that has enabled me this year to like avoid any major injuries. Whereas if I ever get hyper fixated on hitting a certain mileage, then taking a couple of days off running feels very scary and like it's gonna like severely impact my fitness, when in reality it doesn't really, unless you give it that sort of power.
It is funny how much of that becomes a psychological thing. You're so right. Like the idea of supplementing your running with a form of cross training, it makes so much sense. Jen Gregson, who's a top Aussie marathon runner, former steeplechaser,
Yeah.
she's been on here a few times. And one thing that she said, which really stood out to me, because she was struggling for quite a while before her Olympics. I believe she was struggling with Achilles problems. And one of the things that she mentioned was, and I'm not sure if she's still doing this, but for a while, rather than double running, she would use that afternoon run or that second run as a pull running session. And she just explained like that idea of actually getting a workout and feeling your aerobic fitness still improve without all the stress on your body was so beneficial for her. I think so many athletes overlook the idea of developing consistent training with the hope that they can just maintain some insane training schedule, and then they just get beat up and they end up being way less consistent than they otherwise would have been. Has it been something that was hard for you mentally to get your head around, or have you always been pretty happy with the idea that you can accept lower mileage if it means more consistent training?
No, I think it definitely like I was forced into this situation basically. Like I can seem very like chill about it, but it's basically just like I kept trying to do high mileage or run like this training that so many other professionals around me were doing, but every time I would end up injured. So I've like slowly kind of accepted that like my mileage is not going to be that high and that like consistent training is more important and that I kind of need to have more of a hybrid approach with like you said like cross training doubles, never running doubles, and a lot of the time like cross training long runs, cross training a midweek medium long run, like doing that sort of stuff. Um, but I also think that like for there were years when I had like accepted that I was going to be low mileage and I was running low mileage and like still getting injuries.
Mm.
Um, and that was super, super frustrating. So now in the last year, like I still only run 4 or 5 days a week, but I'm running higher mileage than I had been and I haven't been injured. So I feel like even though my mileage isn't high, like my perception of what high mileage is has kind of changed to the point where I'm like, oh, like I'm running 50 or 60 miles a week, like that's pretty good. Like that you feel like a runner with that amount. So even though it's not high mileage, it feels like progress to me, you
For
know?
sure. It's so interesting to hear you say that that's not high mileage, because especially in that period of time, like if you boil that into 5 days of running, it's still like a significant chunk of running that you're doing when you're out there getting it done.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm pretty much always running 10 or more miles, which is really nice. So I like the schedule because when you do run, you really like it's a run, you know, like it's something substantial.
Are there other athletes in your group who are taking a similar approach, or is yours quite unique? Because the reason I'm so interested is because I'm 37 and I started running when I was 12, and I feel like the majority of people that I've spoken to just throughout that time, and especially here in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, and not taking that approach. And I like it because I think there's something to really being taken. There's a lot of people seem to have a one size fits all approach, or at least like the desire for that to be true. And they'll
Hmm.
try and model what, some Olympic marathon runner who's been training for 25 years is doing, and then just break down. Whereas, yeah, there's especially for new runners, I think there's something to be gleaned from your approach, because in terms of, as you said, like the last 12 months of injury free running, um, it seems to justify itself when you look at it from that perspective.
Yeah, no, I think a big reason why I've been able to do this is because I'm not part of a structured team anymore, which was important to me when I left Brooks Beast like what, 2, 3 years ago. Yeah, 3 years ago. And after I left that team, I was like, I really don't want to be on a professional team anymore because, like, as much as I love having people to train with and that sort of structure around a team, like, it can never be what's best for just you. Like, there's always going to be compromises and also basing your training with, like, what the team's doing when they're racing and all of this and, like, the brand's goals for the team and stuff like that. So, the last like a little over a year, I've been working with David Roach as my coach. And I'm not part of like a structured group, but obviously he coaches a lot of athletes. And I know that cross training is like a significant part of his training plan for like himself and also a lot of his other athletes. Um, and then like workouts and training is very flexible around like feedback given every day. And I think that that's been really helpful because I'm able to like shift workouts a day or like shift things back a notch or, ramp the intensity up a notch and really push myself in workouts or like, hold back in a workout if I'm really feeling bad that day. And like I'm able to make those adjustments that feel good for me specifically instead of needing to like mold myself to fit in with a team. And that's not to say teams are bad, but I just didn't feel like it worked for me with where I was. Because, like I said, like like my body was breaking down very quickly under that sort of training. And so being able to find my own style and approach, well, not my own, but like my own
Yeah.
through David, has been like super helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a reputation I think the American college system has. I don't know if it's still like it was sort of 15 or 20 years ago. But I noticed a lot of Australians would go over there and you would start hearing about the mileage and the intensity that they were doing. And I think like the American college athlete on average seems to do way more than the average sort of college age student here in Australia. And it was sort of wild to watch because some people would just take it on and like a Sean Forrest. I don't know if you remember that name, but he was around sort of 10 or maybe 15 years ago. I want to say he won like an NCAA 10,000 meter title. I think he ran for Arkansas. But there were athletes like him who could take on that kind of mileage well for a certain amount of time and then would break down. But then there were other athletes who would get there and they'd just pretty much spend the 4 years in and out of stress fractures and niggles and things
Mm.
like that, all in the name of trying to do what was right for the team. So I can see like as an individual in an individual sport, it makes more sense to find what works for you specifically.
Yeah, and I think some coaches have, like college coaches and professional coaches have like a really good balance of being able to focus on individual needs while also fostering that team mentality. But it's definitely a difficult balance to strike, and many NCAA institutions miss it. And I've like, having run in the NCAA, I've totally seen that with like certain teammates that just like get put into this program and it's not really a good fit for them. And the training is not super individualized and it just doesn't work out. Yeah, and it's sad because I feel like a lot of people get turned off of running during their time in the NCAA, whereas like ideally it should be a lifelong sport, you know?
Yeah, for sure. It sounds like having a guy like David on your side would be a pretty good bloke to be able to speak to because he's no stranger to unconventional approaches to race preparation and training. Is he like I've heard some pretty cool stories about what I can't remember the name of the race. Was it him that broke some long-standing ultra marathon race with a like an
Uh,
insane amount of carbs?
Yeah, yeah, he broke the Leadville 100 course record, and then he won Javelina 100 as well. And his approach is like high carb fueling. It's a The other thing I like about him is everything's very science based. Like his wife is one of the top female athlete researchers in the country, and she's also a coach, and they obviously work collaboratively a lot of the time. And like all of their approaches to training are based off of the latest research and also like just general knowledge in the sport. Um, and yeah, so everything is like I believe in it, and yeah, he does have some crazy ideas, but they all make sense scientifically.
Yeah. Are there any that stand out to you that when you first heard you're like, all right, this sounds like a wild one?
Um, I don't feel like anything he's done with me has been that crazy. I feel like he definitely takes the bigger risks on his own training because like also he's training for hundreds, so I feel like you kind of have to take bigger swings for that. Whereas like when you're training for track or like a lower distance trail race, you can kind of like, you know, you can kind of train like exactly what you need to for the race. But I think like one of the big things is that he was like, "Oh yeah, like you got to start doing these like really hard hill strides like a couple days a week. It'll help you so much." And I and also like I used to do a lot of threshold training and he was like, "I actually think you should do a lot less threshold training and do way more like VO2 max and like top power output type speed training both on the hills and on the track." And like that seemed weird to me because obviously like the last few years like Norwegian threshold training has been like very very popular, um but like switching my training away from threshold and towards like higher intensity has made me feel so much better, and I've like seen really big improvements in my speed and my threshold too, which is counterintuitive, but just like raising my top level speed has helped like every speed below that.
Yeah. Yeah, it is funny. I was kind of I think my sweet event was maybe 3,000 meters when I was competing regularly. But even when I was competing, like there was a weird combination of I think predominantly I was doing a lot of speed work, but I kind of went the opposite direction to you. I went from speed into more threshold. But the thing I always struggled with was when I was in that latter part of my career, focused mostly on threshold, I always struggled going into a 3K race and knowing that the pace that I was going to be required to run was so much quicker than any of that threshold work. Whereas just having the confidence in your ability to run, say, for me, like if I could run 52 seconds for 400, then all of a sudden running in 64 seconds or whatever it might be for 3,000 meters starts to look way less scary. Yeah, there's
Mm.
some athletes that Stewie McSwain's a unique character in the sense that I remember years ago when he ran 3:31 for 1,500, he told me at that time he hadn't done any work faster than like 60 seconds for a 400, and I just couldn't comprehend that. But yeah, it was actually, I took a mental note when you mentioned, I think was it Monday and Thursday you do the strides after your run, and I was curious to pick
Yeah.
your brain around that, because obviously like the technical side of it, a lot of athletes swear by, but the strength side is also like an added component of a little twist at the end of a run like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I usually do 20 to 30-second strides, and I'll do 4 to 6 of them. Um I would say like 2/3 of the time they're uphill. And then another third of the time it's flat. And they're like hard strides. I think earlier in my career, strides I thought of as like smooth,
Yeah,
flowy, you're just rolling kind of. But these are like I'm pushing pretty hard, where it's a near sprint. Um, and especially on the uphill ones, just because like you are going uphill, it's a lot easier to like red line. And so I feel like those ones I push pretty hard, whereas when it's flat, maybe slightly less hard, just because the injury risk is a little bit higher when you just randomly like sprint flat out. But yeah, like I think that those have been helpful too. I also love strides. Like I think they're so fun. A it's like doing a workout, but as soon as it starts to get hard, it's just done. So yeah, you just get to run fast for free, basically.
it's a good point. What kind of gradient are you running on? Are these steep hills or like just a slight incline?
Yeah, maybe like 10%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm trying to picture that in my, yeah. I know roughly what 10% looks like. I mean, it still sounds like a pretty solid hit out,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's
It's definitely like not, it's not like steep, but it's definitely like it's a hill, you know? It's not just a
sure.
grade. It's a hill.
For sure. And so that's a Monday. And then did you say on a Tuesday you'll back that up with a session? Like was the Tuesday a session?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what kind of sessions are you hitting? Is that more like your VO2 max style sessions?
Earlier in the year, Tuesday was more of like a like fartlek um or threshold session. I would say it would kind of alternate, and I did almost all my threshold on the uphill treadmill just based off of heart rate. Um, so it was all at like a 5% grade, and I would do, like 3 by 10 minutes, 6 by 5 minutes, 8 by 5, stuff like that. Or I would do like some sort of fartlek outside. And then Fridays usually were my harder, speedier sessions where I would do like hills or a track workout. Um, but then during track season, sometimes both would be track. Um, and then also when I went into trail season, a lot of the time Friday would be more of like a hard, hilly long run. Um, and then also like if the Friday was a hard hilly long run, the Tuesday would be speed instead of threshold. So
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's really cool. I like how much flexibility. Like I had a coach who used to say to me that the training that we were doing was written in pencil. And what he always meant was that if you've pulled up too sore from a particular session, then let's adjust the Thursday session. We would often train Tuesdays and Thursdays here. Whereas a lot of the time the attitude is no, it's written down, like it has to get done. And you can almost ignore the benefits of actually adjusting it. It's one thing. I was speaking to a guy on here the other day just about wearable technology and how the data that you have access to can really complement, like if you don't get too obsessed with it, can really complement that process of adjusting training. Because I don't know how you go, but I was always the king of saying, yeah, no, I think I've recovered quite well. And then you would see a couple of data points, like whether it was HRV or just a couple of nights of poor sleep. And you go, actually, maybe I'm fooling myself a little bit here.
yeah, yeah. Sorry, I recently got one of these like rings.
Ah,
It's like an off-brand Aura ring. It's a ring con, that kind of provides more data, and it is interesting because I've learned that I severely overestimate my sleep. Like I think in my head, I'm like, I got in bed at 10. No, I got in bed at 9:30. I got out at 7:30. That is 10 hours. But it's like in reality, it's like it took me like half an hour to fall asleep and you woke up to go pee and then like you didn't, and so it's really like, like 8 hours and 47 minutes. So like that's been interesting data, but I'm also someone that like can easily get obsessed with data, especially if I have a lot of it. So I'm like keeping it at an arm's length. I'm like, look, now that like you need to get in bed a little earlier, but like I'm trying not to hyperfixate on it.
That's really cool. It's so interesting hearing someone like you say that, because I think from an outsider's perspective, you look very happy-go-lucky, very relaxed. Like you're very good at putting on not putting on, but like externally, you just seem like nothing could ever possibly phase you or obsess you. So it's interesting to hear that is something that you have to be a little bit cautious about. Like
uh,
what did you just mean? Like you'll get a little obsessed with the numbers and what they mean and represent and things?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I mean, in the past, I definitely was like obsessed with hitting mileage, and in the past, I've been obsessed with like certain numbers of cross training per week or per day, and I have tracked my sleep before, and I got so nervous about getting enough sleep that like I stopped sleeping well, and so like I just know this about myself that like like I said, I've kind of been like slowly over time, I've been able to come to terms with like my mileage might be all over the place and like maybe you cross train more sometimes than others and that's fine. So I'm like, and now I have this ring and I'm like, look, I'm going to be very chill about it. Like you are going to be chill, because if you're not chill, then what's the point?
It's so true. It is amazing. And you said this earlier with relation to like the up and down nature of miles in your training, that so much of the problem is not actually the approach, but just like the emotional reasoning that you offer to any particular session. Like it's so true that you can psych yourself out of what was a really good week of training, but because it didn't look a particular way or didn't look similar to what every other athlete's doing, you assume that something you're doing is wrong, and you can tie yourself up in knots. I heard Elliot Kipchoge, I think he's got the Aura ring, and he was saying that he checks it most mornings, but the one morning he doesn't check it is the morning of a race. And I thought that was interesting
Yeah.
because he said, I don't want to get out there on the start line and be like, okay, I was nervous. I had 3 hours of sleep and that means this. It's like, oh no,
Yeah.
okay, well, I'll look at that later. Because, and I've had moments like this as well, where I'll have like a terrible night of sleep, or I ran my 800-meter PB. This is back in like 2010. And the night before, I was working at an Italian restaurant. I had like 12 hours on my legs. I got home and I remember being like, what did I do that for? That was the dumbest move. Like it pretty much just guaranteed a bad race. And I remember on the way home buying a couple of big bags of ice, putting them in the bathtub, sitting in there for 10 minutes, and getting up the next day and somehow just smashing my PB. And I thought, isn't that funny that you can have this ideal scenario of what like PB territory looks like in terms of build up. And then you can work 12 hours at an Italian restaurant and come out and beat it. And you're like, okay, well, there's a little bit more wiggle room than what I might have imagined.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny that you say that Kipchoge said that, because when I raced like 10 days ago, that was the first morning that I didn't look at my data, because I was like, because the race was early, it was 7:30, so I got up at 4 a.m. to like eat breakfast and stuff. And I was like, look, I know I'm not gonna have gotten like enough sleep, so I just don't even want to know how bad it was. Yeah. And it was like the lowest sleep I'd gotten ever.
Yeah.
So
It's such a good point though. Like, but it's kind of something that I think a lot of athletes can be encouraged by, because pretty much one night of no sleep before a race, I don't think is going to make a huge impact unless you let it. Whereas like the 6 days before it, if you can nail a little bit of quality sleep there, I feel like that's the part that we often overlook. Are you doing
yeah.
much in the gym in terms of strength training on top of your running?
Yeah. So then like as far as strength training, like legit lifting, I'll lift twice a week after my sessions. But it's not like a super long routine, like usually 30 to 45 minutes. Um, because I found that if it's like 60 to 75, I just am not as consistent with it, because lifting is probably like my least favorite part of training, unfortunately. And so I've kind of tried to condense it down to like the absolute essentials. And then I do that and I'm very consistent. But if I try to like do more, then I just start to dread it. And then I just, yeah, yeah.
It's so funny.
So,
I totally relate.
but
I totally relate.
yeah. And then I also do like little bits of strength training all through the week. So I try to do like some sort of core routine, usually 4 to 5 times a week. And then every time I do strides or a long run, afterwards I do this routine called mountain legs, which is basically just 30 step ups on each leg and 30 reverse lunges on each leg. Um, and that's just kind of to work on like muscular endurance, help with like posterior chain activation, which is really good for uphill running and power output. So that's like another David thing that he's like, these are the magic exercises. um, and so yeah, I do those pretty religiously, like 2 to 3 days a week.
Yeah, really cool. It is funny how much you can. I'm exactly the same. So I've just returned, like a little bit of context. About 18 months ago, I decided to get back into some more marathon style training, and I'd been away from the sport for maybe 7 or 8 years, and my approach or my return to the sport was very much just the way that I used to train. It's like, I can handle this intensity, and I'd sort of kept fit for the last 10 years, but nothing in terms of intensity like what I had. And as a result, like there was a whole heap of niggles which popped up. Anyway, I got some guidance with a strength routine. And yeah, like my off season routine is very long and feels tedious. It feels funny even saying it because I'm not anywhere near as competitive as what you are right now. I'm more just doing it out of the curiosity of what I can run a marathon in. And it's so interesting because I think one thing that I noticed yesterday was my first session back of like a smaller gym session. I was there for maybe 35 or 40 minutes. And I was like, oh, this is so much more enjoyable because, like you, like I'll go in there and I'm like, I just got to get it done. Whereas when I get back from a run, not always, but like a post run feel is my favorite post workout feeling.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if
Yeah.
you relate to that. Whereas the gym, I'm like, I come out and I'm a little bit sore. I've been inside for 40 minutes. I'm like, oh, okay, I know I needed that, but in terms of how I feel after
Yeah.
it, it's like, whatever.
Yeah, I know. I feel like sometimes lifting feels really good, but most of the time it just feels tedious to me, which is funny because like everyone says running's boring, but for me I'm like, oh, if I have to do 3 sets of this exercise, I just won't do it. Like
Yeah,
two
so
two
good.
sets is my max. I can't do more than 2 sets of things. It's just after that it's so boring. I have to leave.
It's so funny. I love it. I feel like you're touching on subjects that you're not supposed to touch on in the world of running, and it's so refreshing. Like it's actually a breath of fresh air to hear someone, who's running at your level go, this bores me, and if you tell me to do it, I'm not going to be able to do it consistently. Like I feel like that's a bit of a theme of this conversation is don't just do something because it's conventional, do something because it works. And like, yeah, the idea of doing that twice a week and doing that consistently far outweighs the idea of forcing yourself to do a 90-minute gym session and then missing the next 3 weeks because it was so freaking boring.
Yeah, well, and the other thing is that like I I think that is one thing about being on a team is that lifting with a team is so much more fun. That like
Right.
doing like a 60 or 75-minute gym session didn't feel like so much work. But when I have to show up alone for some reason, like it is exponentially harder. Um, but I also do think there's something about like when you're on a team, or just in general training, there's like so many different things that people do. And I think like not everything works for everyone, but generally everyone just adopts everything because you're like, oh, well, like if it could help, then I want to do it. Whereas I'm like, I really only want to do things that I fully believe in and like really am committed to. And for the most part, enjoy because then that's what I feel like I get the most out of. And I don't feel like I'm missing anything because I'm doing a shorter gym session. Um, and if I did feel like I was, you know, like cutting myself short of like my full potential by not having that time in the gym, then I would totally do it. But it's like for me, I just don't think it's holding me back at all. So I'm like, why would I do extra gym time that I don't enjoy for like potentially no benefit?
Yeah, it's such a good point. It's such a good point. Hey, like for where you are at the moment, looking at the next 12 months, what have you got your sights set on? Are there any particular races or directions that you're looking at taking things?
Yeah, next year is really interesting because it's a track world championships year and a trail world championships year. So I kind of want to try to make both teams, which obviously is very difficult. The U.S. steeplechase team is like so strong, like very difficult to make, but I wanted to try to make both teams. So the qualifying for the trail teams will be in June, and then qualifying for the track team is at the end of July. So it'll be really interesting trying to like balance both of those. Because this year I was able to like do track and then do trails, but next year I'll kind of have to dovetail them, which I'm not really sure how that will work. But I'm meeting with David tomorrow to kind of discuss some of the details, try to figure it out, like as far as training and racing goes. But yeah, that's what I'm thinking for next year. I want to do also the trail championships. I want to do the classic trail, which is like, I think like 7 or 8 miles. Whereas a lot of the trail races I did this year were like 15 to 20 miles. And I just felt
Sure.
like they were so long. And so I'm really excited to do more of that like classic distance that's pretty short in comparison. So next year I want to do more trail races that are like under or around an hour kind of length, like 45 to 75 minutes in there. And do that, and then also steeplechase. So,
Yeah, that's I feel like it's not as much of a unique combination as what it sounds when you first say it. Hey, because like a 45-minute trail race sounds like a lot of that has to do with just having a capacity not just to be aerobically strong, but like physically strong. And
mhm.
that always seems to be a standout feature that people mention when it comes to steeple. Like for whatever reason, it seems to have that reputation as a real strength athletes event. And I mean, yeah, from my perspective, it sounds like it makes perfect sense. I love the fact that you're putting it out there. I love it when people are bold enough to take like a unique approach to whatever it is that they're doing, and that seems to be a standout feature of what you're about.
Oh, yeah, well, thanks. No, I feel like actually steeplechasers generally do really well on the trails, and I think a lot of it is because steeplechase is so much about like accelerating into and out of barriers. So instead of being in like a steady rhythm for the whole race, you're kind of like that rhythm is interrupted and then you have to reestablish the rhythm. And I think trails are really similar to that when like whenever you go around a turn or whenever there's a technical part like some rocks or maybe there's like a small uphill or downhill, like your rhythm is constantly changing and you have to like reestablish that. And so I think like having a steeple background can be beneficial.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. It's always interesting to watch. I always look at an athlete like Al Garouge, who was just very much rhythm based, and you see a guy like him run around. You go, okay, there's no surprise that he never ventured out into an event like the 3K steeplechase because all of a sudden trying to maintain any form of that rhythm gets really difficult. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's really cool. Ali, I'm excited to watch it. I'm excited to see the next 12 months. I've recently discovered your YouTube channel, so I mean, you've got a new subscriber at the very least. Hopefully, a whole heap more people get on board and cheer you on towards that play button. But I mean, outside of that, is there anything that you got on your mind or that you've been thinking about in terms of training or racing that's been interesting or captured your attention recently?
um, you mean like for myself or as far as like watching?
Yeah, just I mean, for anything, I'm always just interested to know what it is that people are sort of playing with when it comes, or at least curious in when it comes to training. For a while, like I'd ask that question, and the Norwegian method, I reckon, was the number one answer. People were very interested in lactate training. I mean, you're a real big takeaway from me. I really like that idea, and it's something I actually use with a lot of athletes I coach. Is the hill sprints. Like that's been a cool little philosophy or a cool little thing that I've personally been playing with. But yeah, I'm just more curious to know if there's anything that's been on your mind around training that you're like, oh, people might find this interesting. I guess that's what your whole
Yeah,
YouTube
there
channel
is actually
dedicated
one more
towards.
thing. So
Yeah.
I um I actually majored in exercise science, so I am interested in like reading up on the latest research, you know. And one thing that interests me a lot is bone density because my bone density was pretty bad a few years ago, so I'm like always looking into ways to improve it, and it's gotten better, obviously, and like I've been able to run more, which is nice. But one thing that can improve bone density is like wearing a weighted vest while you do activities of daily living. And that's basically like it stimulates your body to think that like you weigh more, so you need stronger bones to like support that. But like, so your bones grow stronger than your actual body weight, basically. You don't wear it while you're running or anything, but just like while you're walking around your house, like cooking dinner or something. Um, and as someone that does not have consistent mileage, but still daydreams about, eventually running high mileage, I'm very interested in that. So I might get a weighted vest and start wearing it around when I'm cooking and like doing random stuff because bone density is obviously super important for running. So yeah.
That's really cool. See, I'm so glad I asked you that question because that's I'm getting a weight vest. I don't care.
Yeah, that probably came out of left field. You weren't expecting like I'm gonna wear a weighted vest to cook dinner, but that's the thoughts.
I love it. Ellie, you're an absolute legend. That was a heap of fun. Yeah, you're a breath of fresh air. So thanks for coming on and having a chat. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.